The original proponent of an amendment included in such amendments en bloc may insert a statement in the congressional record immediately before the disposition of the amendments en bloc. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Resolution 340, I have an amendments en bloc at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendments en bloc.
Amendments en bloc consisting of amendments numbered 1, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 22, and 24, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mrs. Biggert of Illinois.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Mrs. Biggert, and the gentleman from Massachusetts, Capilano, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent that amendment number 8 be modified in the form I have placed at the desk.
The clerk will report the modification.
Modification to Waters Amendment number 8, offered by Mrs. Biggert of Illinois. Page 23, line 17. Strike section 1361AB and insert section 1366J. Strike line 10 on page 47 and all that follows.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
Mr. Speaker, I claim the time. This is a bipartisan package of amendments that we are accepting. I urge my colleagues to support the amendments en bloc.
The gentlewoman will suspend. Does the gentlewoman seek consent to dispense with the reading?
Yes.
Of the modification?
Yes.
Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the amendment is so modified, and the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bipartisan package of amendments that we're accepting. I urge my colleagues to support the amendments en bloc, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves her time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield time to the gentlewoman from California.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the gentleman from Massachusetts for yielding me time. Mr. Chairman, I want to commend Chairwoman Biggert and Ranking Member Waters for their leadership and their support for my amendment to phase in higher flood insurance rates when preferred risk policies are no longer available in the community. I represent the city of Sacramento, which is home to both the American and Sacramento rivers. After New Orleans, we are the most at-risk river city in our nation. Since Hurricane Katrina, more than 25,000 homeowners in my district have been remapped, and for them, flood insurance is now mandatory. Their flood insurance costs increased from the PRP rate of $350 to over $1,350 overnight. The sticker shock to a homeowner, whether it be a senior citizen on a fixed income or a family struggling to make ends meet, is unreasonable. My amendment would simply raise the cost of flood insurance for remapped areas from the PRP rate to the full price rate over a period of 5 years. Specifically, my amendment would start the phase-in for homeowners at their current PRP rate. Each year after that, the price of flood insurance would rise by 20% until it reaches full price in year 5. My amendment will save the average policyholder in a remapped area about $843 over 5 years, while not impacting the solvency of the NFIP. I believe this to be a fair and equitable way forward, especially in these trying economic times. And again, I thank Chairwoman Biggert and Ranking Member Waters for their leadership. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman
I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Speaker, we have no further speakers. This en bloc amendment is perfectly fine with us, and I urge its adoption. With that, I yield back the remainder of our time.
The gentlewoman from Illinois.
No. Okay.
Does the gentlewoman yield back her time?
Whenever you want me to.
I would yield time to Mr. Palazzo to speak on the, for as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you for yielding. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Biggert for her leadership on this issue. I rise today in strong support of the reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Reform Act. As a representative of the Katrina-devastated Mississippi Gulf Coast, I understand both the importance of the National Flood Insurance Program, but also the need for its reform. I've introduced 2 amendments to the bill which will be a part of the en bloc amendment. The first calls for the newly created Technical Mapping Advisory Council to include members from coastal or other high-risk flood areas. This assures that the Advisory Council has members that are not just technical experts, but have experienced firsthand the hardship and heartbreak catastrophic flooding and damage causes families and communities. My other amendment allows any claimant to obtain from the administrator any engineering reports or other documents relied on in determining whether the damage was caused by flood or any other peril. When the FEMA administrator or participating company have the task of determining whether a home's damage was caused by wind or by water, the policyholder would now have the right to request those documents relied upon in making that determination. It is my belief that transparency in government is important, especially for policyholders. For those who may have lost their property, they have the right to know the details in the determination of their claim. I urge your support of both of my amendments as well as the full passage of H.R. 1309. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Illinois.
I have no other speakers, and I would urge support for the amendments en bloc and yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendments en bloc as modified, offered by the gentlewoman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The en bloc amendment is adopted. It is now in order to consider amendment number 2 printed in the House Report 112 through 138. Seek recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise as a designee for Mr. Backus to offer amendment number 2.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Schock of Illinois.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schock, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of amendment number 2, drafted by the chairman and my friend, Mr. Backus, to help solve a problem that is prevalent in my district as well as many rural districts across the heartland. As you know, this flood insurance issue affects every town, but especially those along the riverbanks, and FEMA's new requirements that require many of these small towns to make necessary improvements in their upgrades of their levees and dams will require significant investment that America's small businesses and family farms and private properties will have to come up with the revenue to pay for. This amendment in no way seeks to get anyone off the hook, but rather to give them the necessary time, given the large investment that many of these small towns will have to make, given the economic times that we're in right now, recognizing that many of these small towns will require more than the 3 years as is allowed in the underlying bill to make the necessary improvements. It does require, however, in year 4 and 5, which this amendment allows for an extension up to years 4 and 5 to allow to make the improvements, but those communities have to show stated improvement or at least progress towards the final necessary improvements in year 4 and 5 in order for them to get the necessary extension. So I think it makes sense. It's a pretty common sense amendment, and I just want to say thank you personally to Chairman Backus for his work with other members of my delegation in Illinois, and I know those along the Mississippi and other waterways whose towns are feeling the pain of many of these new unfunded mandates put forward by FEMA. So with that, I would urge passage of this underline of Amendment number 2 and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Speaker, I'd like to yield time to the gentleman from Illinois.
For 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and let me thank my friend Mr. Capuano for recognizing me. Mr. Chairman, I would like to first thank the chairlady of the subcommittee, Ms. Biggert from Illinois, and also the ranking member, Maxine Waters, as well as Chairman Backus and Ranking Member Frank of the full committee, and also my friend Mr. Schock and Mr. Shimkus from Illinois. We all worked on this amendment together. It's a good amendment. As I think Mr. Schock just explained, the Backus Amendment gives the administrator the authority to allow for a possible 4th and 5th suspension of the mandatory purchase for certain communities that are making adequate progress in the construction of their flood protection system. It's a common sense amendment. It's a bipartisan agreement, and I urge its adoption and not only support the amendment but the underlying bill as well, and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would yield the balance of my time to the author of the amendment, the chairman of the committee, Spencer Backus.
The gentleman from Alabama,
Thank you.
3 minutes.
I appreciate the remarks of the gentleman from Illinois, and simply think I believe this is a non-controversial amendment. It will encourage local governments to undertake repairs and remedial efforts, and I believe it is a fair, equitable change in the bill to reward local and state governments for their efforts. And with that, I would recommend passage of the amendment.
The gentleman,
I yield back the balance of my time.
the gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I support this amendment, and I yield back the remainder of our time as well.
The question is on the amendment. Offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 3 printed in the House Report 112 to 138. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Ms. Spear of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment was actually considered...
The gentlewoman will suspend. Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for jumping the gun there. I am pleased to present this amendment. This actually was adopted by a voice vote in the Financial Services Committee in 2010, and my good friend and colleague, Congresswoman Biggert, may recall it. It was something that came up in my district where a elderly woman living on Social Security had a mortgage balance on her home of $13,000. But because she was being included in a newly mapped flood zone, her bank required her to purchase the full $250,000 in flood insurance at a cost of more than $2,400 per year. Now, I would venture to say that we don't see ourselves as being in the insurance business by choice. We are in the flood insurance business out of necessity. And it would seem to me that it doesn't make a lot of sense to impose an obligation on homeowners to purchase insurance that exceeds the actual cost of their mortgage. especially when we note that the average flood damage claims are anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000. So to require someone who has a $13,000 loan balance to purchase flood insurance for $250,000 and pay a fee, a yearly premium of $2,400 is just, I think, unacceptable. And I would think my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would like to do something for those people who have been responsible, paid down their mortgages, have small balances. And so this particular amendment makes it a violation for a lender whose only interest in the property is the amount of the outstanding mortgage indebtedness to use the National Flood Insurance Program to require a homeowner to purchase more than the legally required amount of flood insurance, an amount equal to the outstanding principal balance. Nothing, however, would prohibit a homeowner who wished to purchase more coverage from doing so, and nothing would prevent a mortgage lender from including such a requirement in the mortgage contract up front as long as it was fully disclosed. In both cases, the homeowner would be able to make a choice, and this would be full disclosure as well. In California, where we have mandatory auto insurance, once a car owner has discharged their debt on the car, they are no longer obligated to carry coverage for the damage to their own car, only the liability insurance if they crash into someone else's car. So this is very consistent with giving people a choice as well. So again, I offer this amendment, and I will yield back at the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. Gentlewoman from Illinois.
Claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would impose penalties against lenders who require borrowers to maintain flood insurance in an amount greater than the outstanding principal balance of the loan. I think that limiting the amount of coverage to an unpaid principal balance leaves consumers at risk of having to incur the cost of repairs on their own, and additionally is not reflective of the current state of the industry practices. In fact, with the exception of VA loans, limiting insurance to the unpaid principal balance is not recommended under existing law. Consumers, not lenders, will bear the financial brunt of a disaster, so limiting flood insurance to the unpaid balance may protect the lender's financial interest in the property. However, it doesn't protect the consumer's equity and investment in the property. NFIB has established the minimum amount of coverage required at the lesser of the outstanding balance of the loan, or the maximum available to NFIB coverage, which is today $250,000 and $500,000 for commercial properties. The standard NFIB dwelling flood policy requires that 1 to 2 family owners occupied dwellings be insured for the replacement value in order for losses to be paid for the cost to repair or replace the property. If these properties are not insured for at least 80% of the replacement value at the time of loss, the policyholder cannot obtain the full benefits of the policy and may not receive sufficient funds to repair or replace the property damaged by the flood. Guidelines issued by the federal regulators encourage and authorize lenders to require flood insurance at replacement cost, not to exceed NFIP's maximum available coverage. So the guidelines also urge lenders to follow the same rules in calculating flood coverage as they do calculating hazard coverage, where standard industry practice is to require coverage at replacement costs. In the case of condominiums, the guidelines issued by the federal regulators require lenders to ensure that flood protection has been obtained for the replacement value of the property improvements not to exceed NFIP's maximum limit. So I would request a no vote on this on your amendment number 3. And I would yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, ayes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
In that case, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 4 printed in the House Report 112 through 138. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, number 4.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank the Chair. This amendment would strike additional flood-related coverage provided in the underlying bill for business interruption and cost of living expenses. Specifically, this amendment would prohibit FEMA from offering individuals up to $5,000 in living expenses and up to $20,000 for interruption of business expenses. I understand that the committee worked to ensure that the inclusion of this additional coverage would be provided at fully actuarial rates. But let me remind this body that Congress does not have a great track record when it comes to pricing risks. One has to look no further than Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to see an example of that, or just look at this program itself. The National Flood Insurance Program is about $18 billion in the red. Let me say that again. We have a federal flood insurance program that currently owes the Treasury Department nearly $18 billion. So we shouldn't take at face value the notion that any new coverage that's offered is priced at fully actuarial rates. This expansion of coverage will only increase taxpayer liability, which is the last thing we ought to do, that this Congress ought to do, with a program so severely in debt and with a country so severely in debt. Instead, we should be passing legislation to narrow the scope of the NFIP, not to expand it. Simply put, any reform to NFIP, should be moving toward privatization. I'm sure this belief is shared by a number of my colleagues. Voting against this amendment is a vote to expand the current National Flood Insurance Program. Again, a vote against this amendment is a vote to expand the current flood insurance program, a program that is currently $18 billion in debt to the U.S. Treasury. My understanding is that private market participants are hesitant to offer this type of coverage because it's not profitable for them to do so. I'm not sure I've ever seen an instance where government involvement in the market incentivized the private sector to compete. In fact, according to testimony from Taxpayers for Common Sense, quote, "We've learned from federal flood insurance itself that the best way to stifle a private market is to have the federal government provide the same product." That simply makes sense. When you have a federal government borrowing 41 cents on the dollar, the last thing we need to do is expand an insurance program that is already $18 billion in the red. Again, voting for this amendment isn't to cut this program. I wish it were, but it's simply to not allow the program to expand further. FEMA estimated that had this same policy been in effect or enacted in 2005, before Katrina and Rita hit, combined losses from additional expenses and business interruption would have been about $600 million in net losses. If you consider the increase in policy since 2005, they estimate that it would, if we had another 2005-like year, this additional coverage would result in $850 million in net losses just for 2011. We can't afford to do that, Mr. Chairman. If there's no private market for this type of coverage, we ought to understand why there's no private market, and having government enter the marketplace will only ensure that there's no private market for it. And we shouldn't be comforted again by the notion that we'll hear, I'm sure, that the premiums will be priced at fully actuarial rates. That's saying that there's no private market out there, government has to be involved, but we've priced it as if the private sector were involved. Anybody who believes that, I've got a bridge somewhere to sell you. Government entrance into this kind of marketplace is simply not right. We shouldn't be doing it. And to my colleagues who think that we have a debt problem today, think what problem we'll have if we have another year like 2005. According to FEMA's own projections, it could result in $850 million in net losses. So I would urge adoption of the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield as much time as he might consume to the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Baucus.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5
Gentlemen,
minutes.
I thank the chairman. Chairman, I don't think anyone in this Congress is more sincere on cutting government spending than Mr. Flake. And I believe that he comes here with pure motivation. I would simply say this to him and to my colleagues. This is an issue that we carefully considered. It was first proposed as a result of Katrina and the losses there. As he said correctly, this program is $16 billion in the red. And after Katrina, the federal government, through FEMA, SBA, and others, paid out several $billions, not under the flood insurance program, but paid out an estimated $6 or $7 billion to businesses because of their losses from business interruption and temporary shelter and living expenses. In 2006, as really as a result of that, the subcommittee chairman, Richard Baker, held hearings and determined that business interruption and cost of living coverage should be included. It has passed the House, but we've actually, since then, we've never passed a flood insurance reform bill. As all of us know, and I think all of us agree, the legislation before us today has already been scored as a $4.2 billion savings. The reason that it saves money, the reason it takes a program that is costing taxpayers money every day, is because it requires a risk-based premium. Now, beyond that, it also requires reinsurance if the risk-based premium proves insufficient. So it has a cushion. It also says that if private insurers will offer this plan, that the government will not. It makes a finding that a competitive private market for such coverage does not exist. That was actually based on 2006 and again last year. And it certifies that the National Flood Insurance Program will offer such coverage with the prohibition that it is supplemented by taxpayer money from the Treasury. And this was a concern that many of us, including Mr. Flake, had, that the taxpayer would end up subsidizing this. This legislation with this provision actually scores as a $4.2 billion savings over the next 10 years. Actually, I think it could be greater than that because, as Mr. Flake said, we don't know what's going to happen next year, the year after that. We do know this, though. We do know that when we have one of these, in fact, this year is a great example, when we had four $1 billion disasters, what did this Congress do? It appropriated disaster assistance, and that included reimbursement for living expenses and business interruption. Not only that, but the SBA, the Agricultural Department, I mean, I can't imagine how many others that we don't know about. FEMA is a realistic matter. They're handing out checks every day when we have these disasters. Local state governments are doing the same. Why not, instead of this being handed out, why not have the people who own the businesses, who are living there, why not offer them coverage and let them pay the premium and let them share the loss? There are many places in the West where a flood would be almost impossible. There are many places in this country where flood is simply not a problem. Why should those people be required to pay taxpayer money for what has become basically the federal government coming in and reimbursing everyone that doesn't have insurance? That's the question that we've asked. We just had the largest outbreaks of tornadoes and death in the United States and Alabama. And I've seen time and time that people say, we have a situation where there's no insurance, and the federal government comes in and says, if you got insurance, you got to cover it. If you don't, we'll make it up. I don't like that idea. I think it encourages people not to have coverage. This offers them coverage, and I think that the next step is telling them no to these other programs. You should have had insurance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 5 printed in the House Report 112 through 138. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to the rules, I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chair.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 5, printed in House Report Number 112-138, offered by Ms. Ross Layton of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross Layton, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman for the time. My amendment is quite simple. It removes the 100% increase in possible flood insurance rate increases from the underlying bill. Currently, rate increases are capped at 10% a year, yet this bill would double that to 20% per year. Homeowners in this downturned economy can little afford to have this looming possibility. 1 in 4 Floridians is covered under the National Flood Insurance Program, and they collectively pay nearly $900 million in premiums per year. Since 1978, Florida policyholders have paid $14.1 billion in premiums and have received only $3.6 billion in payments. That is 3.9 times more in premiums than they received in claims. Our residents, usually in high-risk flood areas, pay disproportionately more in premiums than they will likely ever see in payments on claims. Despite this fact, Floridians were near the cap of a 10% increase in the premium rates from the years 2009-2010, while the average national increase during the same time was 8%. Despite these problems, my residents in my area say they need this program, but they need this cap where it is. People outside of at-risk areas file over 20% of NFIP claims and receive 1/3 of disaster assistance for flooding. Floridians, my constituents, know that the doubling of the amount that FEMA can charge for their flood insurance is aimed at them. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, one that will prevent unnecessary and unprecedented rate hikes for hardworking Americans on their flood insurance bill. And I would like to yield the remainder of our time to my good friend from Florida, Ms. Wilson.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask the Chair for unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I rise today in support of this bipartisan amendment that strikes a blow for fairness for those consumers who need flood insurance. Along with my colleagues from Florida, Representative Ileana Ross-Leighton and David Rivera, and also Ruben Hinojosa and Rush Holt. I am a Floridian by birth, a proud Floridian. I make Florida my home. Most of my family and friends live in the great state of Florida. On top of our sunshine, Florida has a regular hurricane season and torrential rainfalls. The majority of the people who live in Florida live in this reality for the majority of our lives. However, flooding does not affect the state of Florida. So I want to ensure that taxpayers who live in flood zones do not pay too much for their vitally needed flood insurance. This amendment is very simple. It prevents flood insurance rates from potentially going up 100%. The current cap on flood insurance rate increases in a given year is 10%. My amendment would keep it that way. This common sense bipartisan amendment is fiscally responsible, it protects consumers, and it ensures that the National Flood Insurance Program will remain sound. Mr. Chair, I reserve the balance of my time.
Lady used back a balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Congresswoman Ross-Leighton's amendment, while well-intentioned, would prevent the National Flood Insurance Program from moving toward a more actuarial sound basis for calculating premiums in as quick a manner as possible. The underlying bill provides that FEMA, at the discretion of the administrator, can increase the chargeable premiums for flood policy holders by up to 20% once every 12 months until the premium being paid properly reflects the risk associated with the property. The amendment is intended to save policyholders from the sticker shock premium increases potentially pose, but the underlying bill addresses this concern by allowing for a gradual phase-in of the actuarial rates instead of an abrupt adjustment. One of the core goals of this bill is to move the NFIP towards a more actuarial sound, properly functioning program, and any amendment to slow down that effort must be opposed. And the amendment would strike that part of Section 5 that would increase annual limits on premium rates increases from 10 to 20%. So the sponsors of the amendment have stated that their objective is to prevent a 100% increase in possible premium hikes. But what it is doing is really going to delay us being able to have a more actually sound basis for calculating the premiums in as quick a manner as possible. And Section 5 really addresses this concern by phasing in all the non-pre-firm properties to full actuarial rates over time to eliminate the subsidy and allow the premiums paid for policies to reflect the risk covered by those policies. So I would oppose this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back balance of her time. The question on the amendment is offered by the gentlewoman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed.
I yield the rest of my time.
The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Rosalita, control the time.
I yield the rest of my time.
Time. The gentlewoman is recognized. It is now on the order to consider amendment number 10 printed on the House Report 112 through 138. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Wahlberg of Michigan.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, a member opposed to each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment I am offering today addresses the most pressing concern of my constituents who have problems with the National Flood Insurance Program, and that problem is inaccurate flood maps. I certainly understand that the NFIP is on shaky financial ground, and I commend Chairman Baucus and Congresswoman Biggert and the Financial Services Committee for their work in crafting this bill. But as we vote today to put the NFIP on a path to solvency, we must not let this opportunity to strengthen the program pass us by. Since I returned to Congress in January, my office has been barraged with letters and phone calls expressing concerns about the new and revised flood insurance rate maps that FEMA is rolling out in my district. These maps determine whether property owners will be required to purchase flood insurance, and evidence shows that the current mapping methods are oftentimes inaccurate and onerous or punitive. And while this insurance represents an essential lifeline to some property owners who face real risk of flood damage, it is a costly, unnecessary mandate on those who face no actual threat of being flooded. I'm encouraged that the underlying bill, H.R. 1309, establishes a technical mapping advisory council to review the current mapping standards and propose revised standards to be implemented by the FEMA administrator within 12 months of organization. The TMAP is required to report to Congress and the administrator on how to improve mapping methodology. H.R. 1309 clearly instructs the TMAC on their task, and that is to ensure that the flood insurance rate maps reflect true risk, that the most current and accurate data is used. I look forward to receiving this report from TMAC and for the administrator's implementation of the new mapping standards. But in my view, this review is a tacit admission that the current practices are not working and represent a poorly implemented government mandate that cannot continue. The maps FEMA has been rolling out across the country are not based on best information available, and this needs to stop. My amendment improves on the work of TMAC, simply requiring that while the TMAC studies the best possible mapping methods, none of our constituents will be at risk of inclusion in a new map that uses the faulty, questionable methods currently in place. Simply put, this amendment would implement a moratorium on the issuance of new flood maps until the TMAC has done its due diligence and issued a report on new mapping standards. I'm glad to have the support of Chairman Baucus, and I ask that you support me in voting for this common sense amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Members seek time in opposition.
Speaker.
The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, while I understand the gentleman's concerns about the accuracy of the FEMA maps, this bill does contain a 3-year delay of mandatory purchase and a 5-year phase-in thereafter. That's 8 years. So we already have mechanisms in this bill that insulate homeowners from the sticker shock of mandatory purchase while still alerting them to the fact that they actually live in a flood zone. I'm very concerned in the absence of any maps we place homeowners and communities in the dark about the risks they may be facing. This is why the bill does not delay the maps themselves, but only the mandatory purchase of the requirement. So while I understand the gentleman's concerns, I must oppose the amendment.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question on the amendment is offered by the gentleman from Michigan. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. It is in the opinion of the chair that the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 11 printed in the House Report 112 through 138. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Cardoza of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from California, Mr. Cardoza, a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today to offer an amendment that would remove the onerous requirements onto properties that already have existing flood protection and would prevent unnecessary economic harm to communities already struggling to recover. My amendment strikes the language in the requiring FEMA to include on its flood maps areas of residual risk. I'm offering this amendment because large areas across the country, such as large parts of my Central Valley, of Los Angeles and of Orange County, are also already protected by existing levees and have no history of flooding, but would find themselves in newly designated residual risk floodplains under H.R. 1309. Such a policy would essentially map the entire area in the new residual risk flood zone as though the levee that had been protecting the community for years had never existed. This would have a significant economic impact and in many cases more than double the insurance premiums of those regions throughout the country. In the area I represent, of Stockton, California, and other affected areas of the San Joaquin Valley, this bill would place in the floodplain an additional 280,000 people who currently have flood protection provided by significant levees. In 1995, the annual premium payments were estimated at $30 million. The CBO estimates that the rates will more than double under this bill, totaling an estimated $68 million in annual premiums from the greater Stockton area alone. Floodplain building restrictions for these protected areas would have an even greater impact on the cost of construction. These building restrictions would substantially increase the cost of home construction and severely impact housing affordability at a time when the housing market is already on life support in my area. For my district and many other districts across the country, entire communities would be mapped into the floodplain. Mapping areas that have existing flood protection for residual risk effectively amounts to double taxation of these regions, where citizens are paying taxes for their local flood control agencies and then have to pay additional flood insurance as well as a result of being mapped into these areas. This mapping requirement would also remove an important incentive for state and local governments to invest in flood control projects. If communities will still have to buy flood insurance after they improve and protect their communities, then why would they devote precious resources to these expensive projects? The cost benefits just simply wouldn't exist. Mr. Chairman, at this point I'd like to yield 1 minute to my colleague, Mr. McNerney.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I rise in support of the amendment offered by Mr. Cardoza. He and I are fortunate to represent San Joaquin County in California, which is home to many, many miles of levees and waterways. His amendment is especially important to our constituents. While the residual risk section of H.R. 1309 may be well intended, I believe it should be removed. We all believe that homeowners living in high-risk areas for flooding should have an insurance policy. But this language is overly broad and will hurt my constituents. I've consulted closely with flood control officials from my district who share this concern and have expressed strong support for this amendment. Our country is experiencing tough economic times, and we should take great care to protect homeowners from unnecessary burdens. Our homeowners are losing their homes. Let's not give them an extra burden that they will send many of them into the street. I'm proud to rise in support of this amendment offered by my colleague, Mr. Cardoza, which will significantly improve the bill we are considering today. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to vote for this common sense amendment and prevent undue economic harm to our communities, and I would yield back my time at this point.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Under H.R. 1309, FEMA is required to update its flood maps according to the Technical Mapping Advisory Council's recommendations within 6 months, or report to Congress why it has rejected them. As part of the new standard for the flood insurance rate maps, FEMA must include in any rate map areas of residual risk, including areas behind levees, dams, and other man-made structures. I'm afraid that the Cardoza Amendment would fail to provide homeowners with a real assessment of their risks, thereby impairing their ability to prepare for such natural disasters. And to address concerns about the mapping process, H.R. 1309 reinstates the Technical Mapping Advisory Council to bring in the expertise and perspectives of other stakeholders in FEMA's process for setting new mapping standards. The amendment, I think, would weaken these new mapping standards that are designed to give homeowners and the NFIP an accurate portrait of flood risk, and I would oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan, the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 13 printed in the House Report 112 through 138. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. McGovern of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I will be brief. My amendment is simple. If FEMA makes a mistake in designing a flood map, communities can be reimbursed for the costs of mounting a successful challenge. If FEMA makes a mistake in mapping a flood area, then they should pay for it. Doing so will result in significant savings for cities and towns and homeowners, and to me this is something that should be non-controversial and hopefully wins bipartisan support. I have a longer statement, and I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be inserted in the record, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, the gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
I would support the amendment.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 14 printed in the House Report 112 through 138. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Well, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in the House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Brady of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman for Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment might well be described as a homeowner's right to know. The original bill, H.R. 1309, contains several very positive notification requirements to help ensure that our constituents are more aware of the National Flood Insurance Program, the flood mapping process, and how they can protect their property from the risk of flood. However, one critical area in which the underlying bill needs to require adequate notification is when a homeowner is being newly added into a revised or updated flood map. My amendment would require the FEMA administrator to provide a copy of a flood insurance risk map to property owners who are newly added to such a map, along with information regarding the appeals process at the time the map is issued. The purpose is simple. 1, bring more transparency to the flood mapping process, and 2, protect homeowners' rights by ensuring they have adequate notice their property is being added to the floodplain while ensuring they have the information about the appeals process. Too often homeowners aren't even aware the FEMA is making changes to the flood map in their communities until after a map is finalized, and they receive a notice from their mortgage lender that they're now required to purchase flood insurance.
Perhaps just as often, properties are not only unknowingly added to the floodplain, but they are added based on inconsistent or inaccurate data used by FEMA to create the maps. As a result, many homeowners are forced into buying flood insurance for the first time and mandated to do so when, in fact, their flood risk hasn't changed. Constituents in my own district have experienced these issues firsthand. One county in my district that have been going through the remapping process for the past couple of years. Last year, FEMA introduced a draft map that would have added literally thousands of homes into the floodplain. In one portion of the county, I'd estimate that nearly 10% of the total number of homes would be added by FEMA's draft map. Yet, few people were even aware. I know they weren't aware because I had conversations with insurance agents who write flood policies in the community, and they weren't aware. I've had major developers who are building in that area talk to me about other related issues, but didn't know about the new draft map. To make matters worse, we believe the map was technically inaccurate. FEMA was using incongruent data. As a result, new floodplains were proposed when, in fact, flood risk had not increased. In the second community, the outcry was so great that FEMA had to come back for a public town hall meeting to discuss the mapping process and the National Flood Insurance Program after the map went into effect. Local residents started getting notifications from their lenders that they need to purchase flood insurance, and they simply didn't know why. My office received calls from residents in one portion of that community where the homes have been confirmed as nearly 8 feet above the highest recorded level of flooding in that area ever, but they are now in the floodplain. No one had bothered to tell them. My amendment would ensure that in all these scenarios, the homeowner would simply be notified that their home is potentially being added to a floodplain and tell them about their right to appeal. Homeowners deserve to be informed when the government is making decisions that impact their property. This simple amendment will ensure that they do. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Mr. Speaker, I claim time in opposition. However, as I understand it, the amendment is perfectly fine, and we hope that it is adopted.
Thank you. The gentleman yield back time that was not given to him. The question now is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose is the gentleman from California?
I rise because I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 16, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Sherman of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, and a member opposed will each be controlled 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
I rise to offer an amendment that is co-authored by Chairman Baucus and by my friend Gregory Meeks from New York. It is a bipartisan and I hope non-controversial amendment. This flood insurance program is usually a partnership between private companies and the federal government. The Write Your Own program involves the companies servicing the policies, and one major company that used to write policies in this area decided to pull out of the program and turned over 800,000 policies to the federal government. The whole idea behind the program is that the federal government will administer as few of these insurance policies as possible. The purpose of this amendment is to require that the vast majority of these policies be made available to be handled by private insurance companies. It is simply a privatization amendment. This includes language in the amendment designed to protect the agents of State Farm, which is the company that is no longer in this business, ensuring that they will be able to continue servicing the policies that shift from the federal government to private insurance companies. This is an effort to ensure that these policies are taken off the taxpayers' books without interfering in the relationship between consumers and their insurance agents. I would hope that this would be a non-controversial amendment. As I said, it is supported by the chairman of the committee and offered on his behalf as well as the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks. And with that, I reserve my time.
Gentleman from California reserves his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
To strike the last word.
Does the gentleman seek time in opposition?
I'm in opposition, although I'm not in opposition.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this is a common sense amendment. As many of us on the Financial Services Committee know, the flood insurance program is a public-private partnership where private insurance companies write the coverage and service the policies with the government setting the coverage and the requirements. Recently, State Farm Insurance decided that they no longer wanted to participate in the program, and they transferred, I guess that's a nice word, a unflattering term which is more accurate would be they dumped 800,000 policies back on the federal government. This was after they collected premiums and their agent sold the coverage. This amendment would make changes to that, where if an insurance company wants to participate in the plan, they can. If they want to profit from the plan, they can. But they don't have a unilateral right to dump those policies back on the government agencies. Prior to that, there were about 150 policies that the government was administering directly. What this amendment would do, it's called a depopulation amendment. It directs FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Program to take those policies and distribute them among insurance companies who are willing to service those contracts. And I'm happy to report to the Congress and the members that many insurance companies, mainline insurance companies, have agreed to take up these policies. Out of respect for State Farm agents, many of whom I think were displeased and surprised by their parent company abandoning these policies, it would give them the right to also service those policies. However, you know, there may be some legal problems with that, but we at least don't rule that out. The depopulation of these policies, and by that the return to what the program was set up to function like, and that was with private servicers and agents handling the policies, would be done over a one-year time frame. I actually believe that we should have actually depopulated more than we did, but we did this as an accommodation to FEMA and to some of the State Farm agents. But with that, I would, and I think this is a non-controversial amendment, and would yield back the balance of